Now, is your electricity bill higher almost every month despite severe blackouts? With the constant power cuts, one would expect the amount owed to be slightly lower. 6 hours without electricity a day can equate to 160 hours a month. Energy expert Lungile Mashele joins me now to explain why the lack of electricity in our homes does not translate to lower electricity bills. Lungile, thank you very much for your time here on eNCA. I'm so glad the team was able to get you to speak to us, because this is something that I also don't understand. How does the bill stay the same or is more, even though we don't have power for most of the month?
So thank you so much for having me. The very first thing I think people need to understand is that even if you do nothing, even if there was no load shedding, there was a significant tariff increase for eSCOM customers in April of this year, and for municipal customers from July of this year. So all of us are paying almost 20% more for electricity than we were last year. So that's the very first thing to take into account.
Yeah.
Secondly, most people think that they do not use this electricity, whereas it's not necessarily true. You simply defer it to a later time of the day, because you still shower, you still bath, you still wash dishes, you still, do all the things that you had to do. You simply do them at different times. Now, in some cases, what this means is that you will combine the dishwasher and the washing machine and, bathing of your children and cooking, and you'll do all of this at exactly the same time. And unfortunately, for most people, they don't realize that they're doing it at the wrong time, and they'll do it at the evening peak, where you are then penalized with higher tariffs during this time. But one of the very key things that are happening that people are not seeing is that, especially if you have stages 4, stage 6 load shedding, your devices are off for 4 or 5 hours at a time. By the time they come back, they need to rate back up to that temperature that they were at, right? So if your fridge operates at like 3 degrees, it needs to get back to that 3. It's probably sitting at like 7 or 8 now. That consumes a lot of electricity. So that's where a lot of electricity is going into your fridge, into your geyser, also like your large appliances. And lastly, you are sitting with an issue where a lot of people now have UPS devices, they've got batteries, and if you use them for the evening load shedding period, let's say your load shedding ends at 8 o'clock, at 8 p.m., those devices start charging again, right? Because you don't have solar at this time. That is also consuming a lot of your electricity as well.
But now explain to me, you do talk about the NERSA, tariff hike increment, etc., that came into effect in April. But before April, we were still seeing the same trend of paying a lot more than normal. How do you explain that?
So, there's the tariff increases, which have been happening incrementally over the last couple of years, and they've been significantly high. But I think people also need to familiarize themselves with the areas that they live in and their municipality or eSCOM's tariff regime. If you use more electricity, you end up paying more. So your first 100 kilowatt hours are priced at a different tariff. The next 300 are priced at a different tariff also, all the way up to 650 kilowatt hours a month. Now, if you assume that most people use about 15 kilowatt hours a day, you can basically extrapolate that in a month, you can easily get to about 450 kilowatt hours, which is significant and is extremely costly. And the tariffs between your 100 kilowatts all the way up to your 650 kilowatts are significant. So you could be paying R1 more per kilowatt hour based on the consumption that you are using. So it's always best to try and use as less as possible.
All right, so Lungile, you can correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm hearing from what you're saying is that we still have government or eSCOM to blame when it comes to this, because ordinarily my fridge wouldn't be off for 4 to 5 hours at a time in a day had I not been load shed. So by virtue of the fact that the power comes back and it uses so much to get back to normal is not my fault as a consumer.
Definitely not your fault. And this is why you will often hear, eSCOM or municipalities advocating for people to either use geyser timers or to switch off their geysers and only use them when they need them. Because it basically means that if you're on stage 4, stage 6, every 4 hours, your geyser has to sort of restart, reboil all over again using a significant amount of electricity. And if you consider that up to 40% of your electricity bill is on the geyser itself, this is why there have been calls of try and use a geyser timer or switch it off and only switch on for like an hour a day. Those people who have money have other alternatives. They can use heat pumps, they can use solar water heaters, they can even use gas to actually heat up the electric geysers as opposed to using electricity from the grid.
All right, so that's why then they also talk about the tripping that happens in the system when the power comes back and everybody has their geyser and stove and etc. on. It's too much for the power.
Absolutely, and this is why you will often see in especially highly congested areas that there will be like a relay trip, only because everybody, the electricity comes back on at 6 p.m. Everybody wants their stoves on, their washing machines on, they want the ovens on, the lights on, TV. Everything is now starting all over again. And what people do not realize, especially in the evening peak, is that you do get penalized, you do get charged more for that electricity during the time. So try and use it at different times. Try and maybe run your washing machine load at like 2 o'clock in the morning, if you can, or at 10 p.m. before going to bed. So try and make those little mindful, adjustments also.
So then it would be beneficial to us if, those political parties and civil society organizations who've taken government to court for the court to declare tariff hikes and even load shedding unconstitutional. Maybe it would be beneficial for us to win that case, but government has already said there's nothing they can do.
Absolutely. Load shedding, I think people need to understand, is a response to a constraint. So even the concept of saying you're going to stop load shedding doesn't really exist. You actually need to address the underlying causes, which is that there's an imbalance between supply and demand. And until that is sorted out, you will have to respond by having to load shed, unfortunately.
And meanwhile, everything, that we have to get as consumers keeps increasing. So it's quite tough for us. Thank you so much for your time. That was energy expert Lungile Mashele.